Before we commence, I have to make a couple of announcements. Firstly, Minister of Health, Makhloom Shahabuddin, Sajjada Nasheen of Dargah Aliya Mayu Mubarak, situated at Mianwali, Qureshi District, Rahim Yar Khan, had accepted to be the chief guest today. I have had the occasion to visit his hometown and see for myself the good work the family is doing to redress the grievances of the poor within their constituency. Now, as Minister Health of the Federation, he shoulders a far greater responsibility. He must address the issues of all of the poor of the country. Alas, man proposes, but God disposes. Even the Sajjada Nasheen could not change what God willed for us. In addition to the minister's commitment, Almighty sent us the man who is in charge to deliver health to all on behalf of the government of Pakistan, Professor Rashid Juma himself, the Director General of Health. He's here to preside over the proceedings with the blessings of the Sajjada Nasheen and above all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sir, we are indeed honored by your presence here, and we, as much as we respect the exigency of the ministers to stay back in Islamabad, thank you for taking the time out to be with us. Ladies and gentlemen, believe me, Professor Juma is a doer. Secondly, we have agreed that in her concluding remarks, Dr. Sania will not be making any speeches. She'll be happy to respond to questions that any of you may have. Paper and pencils are available with our volunteers, and they'll come to you during the proceedings. Some of you have read the book, you have questions. Some of you may hear reviews from panelists here, and you may have some questions. Please send them in. Dr. Sania will be happy to respond to them. If time permits, we'll take even questions from the floor at the end. But if you want to have a chat with Dr. Sania Nishtar, a more detailed one, please join us at T2F, the second floor, many of you may know, at 1 p.m. tomorrow. T2F address and details are available at our desk. Ladies and gentlemen, my first interaction with Dr. Sania Nishtar occurred in November of 2005, a few weeks after the October 2005 earthquake disaster hit Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and our administered Kashmir. Today, with 2020 hindsight, I can safely say that she gave us pages out of her then unwritten book, Joke Pipes, so that we could successfully embark upon public-private partnerships to set up rehab centers in the affected areas to serve the physically challenged persons, amputees, and spinal cord injury persons. Alhamdulillah, the Chal network, which many of you have supported and funded, thrives today and is operating on a self-sustainable basis. Our most recent initiative, titled Janam, anchored also in Murshid Hospital and Healthcare Center, was launched last year with the support of a select number of Rotary clubs of Karachi to help improve maternal health in Pakistan. Here again, Dr. Sania shared pages from her book before it went into print to guide us in setting clear, achievable goals to help reduce maternal and neonatal mortalities. In this instance, we have the support of our local obstetrics, gynae, and midwifery professional bodies and associations, as well as the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, UK. I'm very pleased to see some of the leaders of maternal and child healthcare institutions in the audience, and I was also delighted to learn that President of the Rotary Club of Karachi East, Mr. Nisar Sheikh, accepted Mrs. Amina Sayyed's invitation to this book launch in lieu of their weekly meeting and has come with his club members. Thank you all. Ladies and gentlemen, this rare privilege to co-host an OUP book launch is indeed an honor for me. When I read Sania's dedication, and I quote her words, Choke Pipes is dedicated to the silent and unjustified suffering of millions of individuals for whom the right to health remains unrealized, and whose light I strive and aspire to touch. Unquote. If I were to introduce the author and her accomplishments, I will not be done for another hour at least. But that is so true of all our panel speakers who are here present today for the launch of Choke Bites. Without much further ado, I invite Mrs. Amina Syed, Managing Director, Oxford University Press, Pakistan, to deliver her welcome address. She is our First Lady CEO of a multinational corporation in Pakistan, and if I'm not mistaken, is the only one today. OUP, the short form of our enterprise, continues to enrich the lives of many in their thirst for knowledge. Please welcome Ms. Amina Syed.
Thank you, Mr. Hamid Jafar, and thank you very much for co-hosting this wonderful event with us. It's been a pleasure working with you. We've been planning this and talking about it, and it's been a wonderful experience. Dr. Ishrat Hussain, Dr. Bille, the WHO representative in Pakistan, Dr. Tipu Sultan, Dr. Sania Nishtar, Mr. Javed Jabbar, and our distinguished chief guest, Dr. Rashid Juma. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I would especially like to thank Professor Rashid Juma because he's come from Islamabad to be with us today, and he's actually come straight from the airport. So thank you very much for taking the trouble to join us. I think your presence here today shows your commitment to the subject, and I think to books in general, because I think you are one of the best buyers of Oxford books in Pakistan. Whenever I meet Professor Rashid Juma, he always has something nice to say about some of our books. Thank you very much for your support and encouragement. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I'm delighted to present another Oxford book, and this on choked pipes, reforming Pakistan's healthcare systems by Sania Nishtar. This is a significant work in which the author has provided the first consolidated review of Pakistan's health system and has set forth a roadmap for much needed health reform in Pakistan. The present healthcare system in Pakistan is plagued with a plethora of problems, and Dr. Sania Nishtar has covered all of them. The country's insecure economic state in which productivity has plunged owing to a variety of reasons in the prevailing law and order situation. Restrict modes of tackling the problem. Of course, the problem itself is the outcome of multiple factors such as scarcity of monetary and human resources, inefficiency and insensitivity, as well as political instability and lack of vision. There's no subject that Dr. Sania Nishtar has not covered in this book, including corruption, cronyism, nepotism, and the usual list of problems that plague the system. There's no doubt that the healthcare system in Pakistan needs far-reaching reforms, and it's clear from the work that Dr. Sania Nishtar understands the problem in depth. Her analysis of the conditions and her scholarship are really impressive. She's highlighted the deficiencies of the service delivery system, imperfect access to essential medicines, and deficiencies in the laws that pertain to regulation and distribution of healthcare essentials. Moreover, she has comprehensively discussed and suggested in this book realistic measures for improving the situation, which are actually global in their relevance. Dr. Sania Nishtar is the founder and president of Heartfile, an influential NGO and think tank on health. She has published more than 100 articles in various journals and has written 4 books. She is a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians in London and holds a PhD degree. She has been widely quoted in the media and has received many national and international awards. Her NGO, Heartfile, is recognized as a model for replication in other developing countries of the world. Just to give you an idea of our publishing program, I'll mention some of our recent and forthcoming books. Early Childhood Development from Understanding to Initiatives, edited by Bilal Al-Palawan. Islam, the State and the Population, by Gavin Jones and Mehtab S. Kareem of the Aga Khan University Hospital. Nutrition interventions for maternal and child health and survival by Zulfikar Bhutta. Wars, insurgencies and terrorist attacks, a psychosocial perspective from the Muslim world by Dr. Uneza Niaz. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome our distinguished speakers here today, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.
Our first speaker is the World Health Organization country representative in Pakistan, Mr. Khalif Bilal Mahmood. He has responded to earthquakes, floods and conflict in our country, where some 8.5 million people have been displaced by disaster or insecurity in the past 5 years. In addition to humanitarian emergencies, under Mr. Bilal's round-the-clock guidance, his team also promotes primary health care and immunization. I quote Mr. Bilal from The Lancet. Health is an undeclared, sustained war because we are fighting disease and illness and lack of awareness and understanding. Unquote. I don't think the gentleman needs any further introduction. Please welcome Mr. Bilal.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable panel members, distinguished friends, ladies and gentlemen, assalamu alaikum and rahmatullah. I am indeed delighted to be here today, and I have certainly made a point for myself to be in this August gathering. 3 days ago I was in Geneva, and I was afraid that I may miss the flight. I got it. Today at 6 o'clock, I traveled to Nawabshah. I came back again to make sure that I don't miss this very important gathering. The reason being that we are indeed witnessing a very unusual moment, which the life and dedication of one person has infused and influenced an entire nation. And indeed, the world. Because we in WHO consider Nishtar as one of the great scientists of public health who has given to the world community with her expertise and knowledge, and have always tried hard to defend the cause of those who do not have the opportunity to speak out in such occasions. I take the floor this afternoon to express my deep appreciation and recognition of this monumental work undertaken by Dr. Sania Nishtar in writing a book that interfaces through 60 years of Pakistan's experience in dispensing health development. The book depicts the sincere and laudable attempts made to improve the health systems of this country, the challenges faced, and the successes and failures experienced while traversing this difficult road of social transformation and reform. Through her book, Nishtar has enabled us to capture at a glance the major lessons to be learned and the opportunities available to avert the mistakes made in the past. Through her wide experience of national and international public health, Nishtar has not attempted to give us an isolated snapshot about Pakistan's health development, but has interfaced her analysis with the global history of public health, placing WHO at the center, at the reference point for advocacy for universal coverage, essential primary health care, equity, and quality in providing care. In this analysis, the book critically outlines the faults inherent to international health development. She closely shares how the early attempts of focus on collective medical and selective primary health care that were naively aimed to alleviate suffering and to reap the low-hanging fruits of attainable public health gains, respectively, were not the correct options for attaining lasting improvement in the health of nations and the world community. The book collectively claims to base its arguments on the WHO promoted focus on the health system, metaphorically simulating it with the hardware, without which the software component, metaphorically representing the vast and diverse programmatic interventions ranging from maternal, neonatal and child health, control of communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, and the fast-growing area of health promotion will fail to create a lasting impact without the effective performance of the central processing unit of the hardware, namely the health system. In this analysis, Nishther has analyzed what we call the 6 pillars of the health system, which are clearly and in detail are reflected in the different chapters of the book. Sania is offering a solution to the health challenge facing Pakistan through a feasible, effective, and affordable reform paradigm. It boldly diagnoses the maladies of Pakistan's health investment, weak intersectoral action, and poor performance. She clearly outlines that health would stand tall in a situation where social policies and plans are comprehensive and health is placed at the center of the development process. The book gives us the realization that much of the scope of public health is conventionally placed outside the medical domain, exemplified by the provision of safe drinking water, solid waste disposal, food safety and security, occupational and environmental health, housing conditions, and of course, the overarching poverty levels and growing inequities existing between rural and urban populations in Pakistan, as well as the natural and man-made disasters. In that context, Sania is taking a position where the inequity is called for action. In rural areas of Pakistan, the infant mortality rate is 80 per 1,000, while in urban areas it's 40. The book amply addresses the mixed health system of Pakistan and the diversified efforts made to expand the public-private partnership, the service delivery paradigm, including the recent lessons of outsourcing and the prospects of pursuing a model that entails better results in public health. She boldly again puts into question the issue of outsourcing, which in principle she agrees, as we do also in the literature, but asks the question how that outsourcing is being given, how the outsourcing is being managed, controlled, monitored. So the question is, I think, very courageous question is that very few people could put them into place. In this broad analysis, the book clearly and rightly assigns the government as the principal custodian of public health and renders it accountable in providing essential life-saving services to the population. I think that is an issue where squarely the government takes responsibility to address the basic essential services. Who will provide vaccination for free? Who will treat people with TB for free? Who will provide health education for free? Who will meet and assist a patient in emergency for free? When all these are rights that people have to take. Moreover, the book does not stop at providing this deep analysis about the state of public health in Pakistan and stipulating the responsibility of the state. It has made a splendid attempt to repair what Nishther has metaphorically labeled as chopped pipes. In this regard, she has put forward an important reform agenda for consideration and action, outlining the elements of the following strategic roadmap, which in Harbour are put as agenda for action. A wider perspective role for all stakeholders, embracing the right approach for health service delivery by enhancing individual and community access to affordable and quality care as the underlying prospects of health development. Addressing the broader constraints related to political economy and the ability to create a fiscal space for wider national social accountability and investment. A call for widening public health financing and social protection, I repeat, social protection, coupled with a sound and strategic BHC approach to the delivery of health services with universal and equitable access to promotive, preventive, curative, and rehabilitative services. Building institutional mechanisms to harness the regulatory approaches that enable the public to access the non-state providers and create a locally designed outsourcing mechanism that are accountable to the health system and capable of providing health for all and achieving health MDGs. And a call for the strategic use of technology, including medicines, where WHO has laid down clear policies consistent with those proposed in the book. In our region of WHO, the same life-saving essential medicine may have a cost that is 400% higher than a similar identical medicine in another country. This results from the intricate interplay of drug companies and their untempered greed at times, and because of high government. The use of generic medicines with tested quality and known price ceilings provide this problem. The suboptimal efficiency of appropriate technologies such as the EBI quality system, transparent and accountable procurement and proper management of health information system, the for evidence-based decision-making are some of the grey areas projected in the book. Dear friends and colleagues, WHO commends the work of Sania Nishtar and recognizes her as one of the luminaries in global public health. Indeed, we salute you, Sania Nishtar. The clarity and criticality of her mind, her devotion to and belief in a health system operating within the framework of private health care, her visionary alignment with the pro-poor principles of public health, and her unwavering desire to contribute on a pro bono basis to the public health design in Pakistan are some of her known credentials. Our association with Sania Nishtar is enunciated by a shared belief that health development is a state responsibility and its attainment is intricately linked with community development and grassroots-based social action, with poverty reduction being a cornerstone to any health transformation or reform. We share the vision that health reform stems from an informed political decision and commitment to assign the highest priority to the resolution of social problems in general and health problems in particular. The latter will entail a universal access to the requisite health care services to a well-defined package, freely provided to the public, linked to a referral system capable to bridge the gap in service delivery and founded on principles of equity and social protection led by the indispensable unity of health systems, organizations, goals, and objectives. We are glad that the Ministry of Health of Pakistan, the forthcoming health policy, is embracing many of these principles. Before concluding, I humbly salute this prolific scientist and social advocate of Pakistan. And I hope that her valuable work, which is recognized elsewhere in the world, is effectively utilized and translated into action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Philip. Like your Director General, Margaret Dan, members of our General Network believe that health is everybody's business. It cannot be left to government and NGOs alone. Every citizen must participate if a change or reform is expected. Our next speaker, Professor Syed Tipu Sultan, Principal, Bahria Medical and Dental College and President-elect of Pakistan Medical Association Center, is a perpetual optimist. If I were to say that he has given his life to serve the medical profession and the poor, it would be an understatement. Today, his family proudly counts among its ranks 34 qualified doctors, including several eminent names spanning 3 generations. When Dr. Sultan gained admission in Dow Medical College, his mother was in the first year there. Thanks to him, anesthesiology has progressed greatly in Pakistan. Candor is his best suit, even if it means a personal loss to him. I invite Dr. Sultan to share his views about choke pipes with us.
Thank you for your kind words. Honorable Chief Guest, Professor Rashid Juma, Director General of Health, Honorable Khalif Mohammad Bille, WHO Representative in Pakistan, Ms. Amina Syed, Managing Director, Oxford University Press, Mr. Javed Jabbar, former Senator and Minister of Information, Mr. Ishrat Hussain, Dean and Director, Institute of Business Administration, Dr. Sania Nishtar, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank Ms. Amina Syed for inviting me on this occasion. I would also like to congratulate her for publishing this historical book and organizing today's function. This unique book, written by Dr. Sania Nishtar on the affairs of health management of our country, Pakistan, is a systemic scientific analysis of failure of a health care system happening right in front of us since the last 60 years. This failure is not God-sent disaster, but 100% man-made. I mean man-made, nothing to do with women. Simple understanding and analysis of self-explanatory. Simple understanding and analysis is self-explanatory that this inefficient health delivery system is full of wrong plans and strategies, which Dr. Nishtar has been kind enough to call choke pipes. I know a professor, surgeon by profession, who very proudly calls himself a plumber, managing literally choke pipes of human system. I have been working with him since the last 40 years as an anesthetist, helping him to clean, repair, replace and manage these choke pipes of human system. He only mends one system, but still it makes the whole body and system working and efficient. Sania Nishtar is talking about a system full of choke pipes and an inefficient system, making it incompetent. Somehow, these pipes have been choked deliberately. I would compliment Nishtar for the dedication of this truthful scientific book to the silent and unjustified suffering of millions of individuals for whom the right of health remains unrealized. There is a big confession into it. There is a big shame for us as a nation, especially the health caregivers like me, the health decision makers like some of us sitting there, the implementers, the corrupt elements in the system, the concerned NGOs, and our international friends who teach us how not to solve the problem and how quickly we learn it. Dr. Nishtar has very clearly analyzed and pointed out on the fallacies of these multiple vertical programs on disease-specific eradications. Based on deliberate misunderstanding, corrupt and vested interest practice, we have failed miserably in making all these efforts. We have failed to eradicate polio, what to talk of malaria or other burden of diseases. Pakistan Medical Association has repeatedly pointed out about these non-starters and non-feasible vertical programs many decades ago and is still doing it. These vertical programs serve the purpose of vested interest groups or few persons only. Millions and billions of rupees and dollars have been drained and lost. Thanks to Dr. Nishtar, you have scientifically documented it. There is a whole list of these disease eradication programs in the book. We love to treat these diseases one by one. May it be TB, leprosy, malaria, diarrhea, acute respiratory disease, AIDS, hepatitis, polio, nutrition problem, or vitamin A deficiency or blindness. Very boldly, all these along with the game of action plans, formation of commissions, different national programs and national policies, short-term and long-term, have been documented in this book. It has been discussed, analyzed, and is in your hand with conclusion very interesting. Health and education is a basic fundamental right of every citizen. Fortunately, it is the call of humanity also and Islamic teaching too. But it is neither our priority nor in our agenda. In the last 62 years, we have had the taste of all varieties of democracy and dictatorship, divided almost equally in time and duration. They confronted and complemented each other, but were unanimous in one issue: health budget. None of them increased spending on health and made sure that it does not exceed more than 0.7% of GDP. By the way, education budget has also not improved. This book exposes the planning, budget spending, corruption at all levels of this sorrowful status of health of the nation, may it be federal or provincial health department. Federal Health Ministry mandate is policy making, coordination and technical support. But this ministry has made a name in one thing only, that is the registration of drugs, that is about 57,000 drugs or more, making it the only country in the world to be famous for this. It has failed to give any health policy or manage any other mandate. This excellent book, Choke Pie, Reforming Pakistan Mixed Health System, has discussed this issue in detail and suggested remedies. Explaining the chapter of health system in Pakistan, the population of under 60 million health coverage by the mixed health system, the bulk of 73.3% manages it by out-of-pocket payment. Everybody spends money for his own health. The rest of 26% is managed by 6 agencies in which public sector is only 9.5%. Armed forces manages their own people, that is 4% of the population. Philanthropy, that is public mandated private means, looks after 12% of the population. This mixed health system is practiced in South Asia, all developing countries and some other countries, including some developed countries. There, the share of public sector is very high. Responsible governments with a mandate of looking after its population devote high percentage of GDP and have no corruption. We spend less than 1% of GDP on health, loaded with magic bullets of corruption fired by magic guns. It is elaborately discussed and explained in this fact book by tables and charts, you get the grip instantly. I would call it blunderbuss management of health for all, of which Pakistan is the signature, and heading towards MGD, that is Millennium Development Goal, about which the government talks in seminars and symposia so proudly. While reading this book, when you reach reforms in healthcare, you get a surprise of your life, so nicely organized and written. You name the possible health legislation in Pakistan, it is there. Still, we are in a blunderbuss health system. Going towards health system reforms and solutions, the writer points rightly towards professional development, capacity building, and to build strong institutions. These public sector institutions must develop long-term institutional goals and not short-term goals, which is so visible in all the institutions which matter. Finally, we now have a document well researched and elaborately written, a must for all thinking brains busy in planning and development, especially health. Only educated and healthy nations move forward in this environment of survival of the fittest. Thank you very much.
I've known Mr. Javed Jabbar, former Senator and Minister of Information, since he was Chairman and CEO of M&J Advertising. A trendsetter he is. I don't think a better Ad Asia Congress was organized after 1988 when he was Minister. However, as members of civil society, we must recognize his contributions in furthering democracy, supporting women's rights, and facilitating civil-military dialogue in Pakistan, amongst many other important good deeds. It is also worthy to cite that as founding president of Ban Bailey, a Tharparkar-based NGO in Nagar Parkar, he personally helps conduct annual elections of the executive committee to administer the NGO's initiative for the poor. This is a new one for me. I invite Mr. Javed Jabbar to enthrall us with his views.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Chief guest Dr. Juma and Dr. Sania Nishtar, Dr. Bilay, Dr. Ishrat Hussain, Dr. Tipu Sultan, Zamina Sayyid, Mr. Jafar, thank you for your introduction. Dr. Ghaffar Billu, and eminent ladies and gentlemen, especially Mrs. Shabnam Jabbar, who is unfairly seated so far away from me. In fact, you know, we must do away with this system of someone very well-meaning introducing everyone. If your spouse is there, the spouse should come and introduce the other spouse. Then you really get to know what kind of character you're going to be confronted with. But I see before me a very fine assembly of people, outstanding personalities who have served public health, who have also probably sometimes been the victims of the public health sector and managed to survive, but also good citizens. And what a marvelous turnout for a book that on the face of it is a formidable technocratic book. But it goes to the credit of OUB, the inimitable Mrs. Amina Sayyid, to be able to motivate and draw all of you here. Mr. Jafar, who has been harassing me with phone calls to remind me about this event as if I would forget. And it is a credit to the author for being able to invite you and to engage you in this launch of this most interesting book. I felicitate both the author and the publisher for making such a valuable contribution to health literature in Pakistan. You know, the publication of a new book is like, may I say so, the birth of a new baby, especially when it's all about the health system. And being an incorrigible male chauvinist that I am, shamelessly so, because I am present in a historic venue. This is where my walima was held. He was seated at that side. Rana Liaquat Ali Khan was there. So how can I forget? This is where I began the process of making babies, 2 marvelous babies, but also managed to write a few books. And seeing this great phenomenon today of a woman, distinguished doctor, giving birth to a book, and I see somewhere trying to be inconspicuous, perhaps her husband, yes, her husband inconspicuously seated at the back. I am, going to surrender to the temptation of saying this is the birth of a baby. In many senses, the first of its kind. And when a baby is born, what do you go through? First of all, the sheer delight you feel at the addition of this new creature that's crying, that's wailing, it has so much energy to it. And then of course you marvel at the complexity that must have produced this baby. Far more than 9 months in this case. I'm sure great years of experience. And thirdly, of course, one has to speculate on how this particular baby will grow in the years ahead. What will happen? And when you think of the complexity that has gone into the creation of a baby or a book, one cannot help remembering that this book comes with just about 387 references at the back of it. 26 pages devoted to references. And if some are repetitive, say about 300 references. Most of them, of course, from overseas. But about that in a moment. But it is truly a labor of love. And when you think of a baby, inevitably you think the weight of a baby. The weight of a baby is very important to determine whether it's a healthy baby. Well, this is a very modestly weighted book. Only 200. I don't know why you're applauding at this, because it is 250 pages if you take away the foreword and the preface, and most unusually it has a précis, like an executive summary. So some of you who want to assume that you read a book and do not want to go through it might be able to afford reading the précis. But for a book that's only 250 pages, it packs a lot of material in it. And in fact, I would say that it deserves to be 750 pages. Though of course then it would look too daunting for it to be readable. But it is a book that is larger than the sum of its parts. And then, of course, it is the result of painstaking work. Painstaking work both in Pakistan and overseas. And such a structured book, so well structured. I mean, it's got about 100 different headings and subheadings. And you wonder whether anything at all has been left out. And I do believe that something has been left out. But that I'll come to when I'm going to relieve you of my company. But just look at the range that she manages to cover. Starts with health, history, health is a human right, global snapshot. She looks at healthcare passingly, though in a marvelous place like Cuba, which reminds me that democracy, alas, has many good virtues to it, but not necessarily the only form of government that can ensure a good health system. She refers very appropriately to the socialization of healthcare in Cuba on page 9. And look at Cuba. James Grant, the great head of UNICEF, who is alas no more with us, Dr. Billu and I had the privilege of hosting him in Malir in 1981. And for an American to pay this compliment to the Cuban public health system was the best ever. He said, if there is one health superpower in the world today, that is Cuba. And therefore, much as of course we must continue to learn from democracy, I think even dictatorships, one-party dictatorships, as has been proved in China, as was proved indeed even in the Soviet Union, which in some respects delivered public health care at low cost or no cost, Pakistan has a great deal to learn. Because we sometimes make the mistake of assuming that simply because we have a democratic government, it will act as a magic wand. So she takes a global snapshot, she looks at the public system, market system, regulation, oversight, financing, employers' contributions, staff absenteeism, pilferage, one of our favorite pastimes, malpractices, primary health care, behavior change, my God, innovations in service delivery, where she looks at how new technologies, whether it's the mobile telephone or an oracular lens that's being offered for just $5, where applications of new technologies could help make new service concepts affordable and available on a mass scale, with about 10 crore telephones at the moment in the hands of our people, out of 16 crore people. Capacity building, cost of medicines, social policy, not looking at social policy just as education policy or health policy, but a comprehensive vision of what social policy means. And the reform agenda, finally the cost of medicine. So she virtually hasn't left any aspect untouched, except perhaps the population sector, where she does refer to it. And she also lets us know or reminds us that amongst the many distinctions that we have as a country, one is that we are now the only country in the world which has two separate ministries, one for health and one for population. And the results of which, of course, are obvious, because we have not been able to integrate these two most relevant processes into a singularity and into a coherence that is so badly required. With one observation on page 49, I simply want to record, first of all, the observation that she's quoted, and this is interesting. Under the heading of factors that lead to poor health status and political factors, conflict and disaster, she makes the statement that the recent conflict and extremism in Pakistan has claimed more lives than deaths from maternal and child health and HIV and AIDS combined in 1 year. That's a very startling and a very strong statement. I hope it is not true, and this is not to disrespect the credentials and the ability of the author, but when I looked up the references, she attributes this to The Economist. Now, The Economist is a very well-reputed paper, a very reliable paper most of the time, but they too are capable of gross errors. About 2 years ago, they gave us the dubious honor of calling Pakistan the most dangerous country on earth. And though some of us may be tempted to share that view, it is certainly not so. And unfortunately, The Economist very rarely gives the byline, especially for its overseas correspondence. So we don't know whether this particular statement is factually correct. And I would urge that you should take The Economist also with a pinch of salt and pepper, and not to take them for granted. And then on the rational use of drugs, she reminds us of something that is shameful. And it is so good that the Director General Health is here today, because our approved drug list exceeds 400 drugs, which is the largest, longest list in the 8 South Asian countries. And what is the justification for this? I'm not trying to personalize it and address it to the distinguished Director General. This is a historical process. It was not invented by the current government. But we need to address this undue dependence on an excessive number of drugs, which leads to its own complications. And of course, the reform agenda which she identifies is most comprehensive and thoughtful. It is a thought-through process, and it talks about the need for multi-stakeholder consultation, participation, not simply the formulation of a government or a ministry or a cabinet, but something that evolves through participation. Though everything, of course, that evolves through participation is not necessarily good, it can end up with confused, weak initiatives. And when we talk about initiatives, it's interesting, she hasn't mentioned this, but in that tracing of the historical process by which health initiatives have emerged in Pakistan, it is apparent that for the first 47 years of Pakistan, from 1947 to 1990, we didn't have a single overarching national health policy. We did have 19 different health initiatives to tackle different diseases and to combat various threats, but not a single time did we have a national health policy. And then, of course, because we want to make up for lost time, in the space of 11 years we've had 3 policies. 1990, then 1996, and then 2001. And perhaps that reflects the other problem, the lack of continuity and consistency in implementation of whatever has been agreed upon in a given policy, which needn't be rigid, but which needs to be kept in mind as you respond to new situations. I'd like to conclude by saying that while the book is a landmark and a milestone, it makes an outstanding contribution to the informational dimension in 3 respects. Number 1, it enhances the level of awareness and knowledge that all of us need to have. Those of us who are interested now have access to an excellent, compact source of reference, where you would have otherwise needed to go to about 50 different sources to get this kind of distilled data and the meaning of that data in one single source. So it's a valuable contribution on an informational level for civil society. Second, it's an excellent input for discourse within the health sector on a technocratic level. I hope that various health institutions, foremost among them the Aga Khan University, which has done so much to encourage thought and dialogue, uses this as a focal point to stimulate a series of exchanges on where policy should head in the next few years. And thirdly, it acts as a marvelous bridge for the health sector of Pakistan and the global health sector. I know that WHO also serves that purpose, but you just have to look at the back jacket of the book to see the remarkable quotes and comments that this book has received from outstanding personalities in the global health sector. I think the book stresses the need, obviously, for political leadership and for a holistic view. A holistic view not only from a political level, but to look at the need to integrate health with environment, health with education, health with improvement of governance above all. And where we need to remember the different models and systems that we need to learn from, to change or to remember what Deng Xiaoping said when he took over the leadership of China from Mao Zedong, and he was going to restructure economic communism while retaining political communism, unlike Gorbachev. He said, looking at the free market mechanism and the protests from the traditional socialist or communist cadre within the Communist Party, he said, I don't care whether a cat is white or the cat is black, as long as the cat catches the rat. And that's why I refer back to the Cuban health model, the need for Pakistan to learn from other countries, whether it's Hong Kong, which she has quoted again very relevantly, or Cuba. Let us go out there and learn. I cannot also help remembering what Ivan Illich, a very profound Austrian philosopher who passed away in the year 2002, had to say about the health system. Of course, his book, Medical Nemesis, he began by saying, the greatest threat to human health is the medical establishment. I mean no disrespect to the medical establishment. You could say the greatest threat to the people of Pakistan are innocent politicians like myself who are elected or not elected, as the case may be. But in this case, one is tempted to turn that around and say the greatest threat to health reform is the health establishment. Because every establishment develops a vested interest in retaining the familiar precepts and principles. And perhaps we should not grudge that. I, as a Pakistani citizen, marvel at the capacity of our rotten, corrupt, inefficient public health system to render enormous service under extremely adverse conditions and do whatever they are doing. Most of us here in this hall today are privileged to be able to afford the best possible health care. Many of us are able to fly out to London, to Mumbai, to Singapore, to New York at 24 hours notice. So we don't know what it's like if you neither have a passport or a visa, you cannot afford an air ticket, and you have to depend on civil hospital or the district hospital in some remote part. And I think we do not often acknowledge the great service rendered by our public health system, with all its limitations. It is capable of excellence, and it is also capable of insensitivity and inadequacy. But we must take strength from Pakistan's remarkable ability, whether it is to increase the average age expectancy from 49 at the age of when we were born as a country, now it's over 62. That's happened in other parts of the world as well. But it's not all bad. And whether it's the private sector that has excelled in showing what health facilities can offer in Pakistan. As my final piece of unwanted advice, may I submit to the distinguished author that in the second edition, it would be so nice to feature, even at the risk of being anecdotal, actual case studies of living people, a child, a woman, a man, in a village, in a Kachi Abadi of Karachi or Lahore. Show us their faces. Tell us how our health systems have actually helped cure some disease that they were suffering from, how they've survived. And that will, I think, give the book a dimension of visualness and a dimension of engagement that even a general reader will be able to easily enter into. Because this book deserves to be read beyond the health sector. The health sector is far too important to be left to health professionals alone. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Javed Jabbar. 2 years ago, Dr. Ishrat Hussain took over as the Dean and Director of the Institute of Business Administration in Karachi. Earlier, he held the office of Chairman, National Commission for Government Reforms in the Prime Minister's Secretariat. In that capacity, he completed a comprehensive report on the reorganization of the government structure, processes, and human resource management policies. He understands what reform entails. His rich experience of years at the World Bank and as Governor State Bank of Pakistan puts him in a unique position to review choke pipes with a perspective very different to what we've heard so far. Sir, we look forward to benefit from your lucid insight to the work of the author, Dr. Ishrat Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Jaffer. It's a very difficult act to follow, Mr. Jaffer. And I don't know why the sequence he came before me. Because I can neither match his eloquence, nor his wit, nor his sense of humor. So you have to bear with me for the rest of the few minutes. The advantage of being the last speaker is that what I was going to say has been said by all my preceding speakers, so I can be very brief, because that is something which I am going to attempt to do. I first like to say that Sanya Nishtar has taught me a lot of material and stuff which she reflected in this book during our association in the National Commission of the Government Reforms. The chapter which we have designed about the healthcare reforms owes its intellectual gratitude to the work which has been done and which is reflected in this book by Dr. Sanya Nishtar. So I owe a personal sense of gratitude to her for being a student of hers, but at the same time a beneficiary as far as the healthcare reforms are concerned. The best compliment which I can think about this work is given by Dean Julio Frank, who has said in his foreword that the most important impediment to reform in Pakistan is the country's public sector institutional culture, which is focused on short-term goals as opposed to evidence-based, long-term, enduring actions with potential to bring sustainable change. And this is what Sanya Nishtar is trying to do, to get away from the short-term, politically expedient actions which every government wishes to take for the sake of glory, of aggrandizement, of other motivating factors, but to lay down a highly researched, robust, and solid platform on which the healthcare delivery system can be built. And unlike most health economists whom I have seen or worked with, or the health professionals, the distinguishing feature of this book is that it contextualizes the healthcare in the larger socio-economic context. It takes the whole governance structure of the country and shows that you cannot really have an island of excellence in any particular sector without looking at the larger picture. She adopts the same approach as far as the health financing is concerned. Coming from a health professional, when she talks about debt limitation, fiscal responsibility, broadening the tax base, pro-poor growth, overall transparency, for a moment I was lost that whether I'm listening to an economist or to a health professional. This is the broad parameter. If we don't understand that, we're never going to get anywhere. So the two pillars which I have picked out of this book, which I would like to emphasize, is the governance structure of Pakistan, which has to be completely revamped in order to provide a conducive environment for healthcare delivery system to function. And the second is the whole health financing nexus, where people take these facts about so much percentage of GDP is being spent on this or that. Ladies and gentlemen, even if that money was being spent on the welfare of the targeted population of this country, which deserves free public health care, we would be much better off. But even that money is misallocated, is misappropriated, is misused for the sake of a small segment of the population, which I, in my book, have called the elites of this country. The doors of the civil hospital and the general hospital are open for me anytime. All the expensive medicines are available to me at my beck and call, although I can afford to pay for that. And as Javed said, we can all fly to the best places in the world in order to get the health care. We are depriving that old man who has brought his son from the far-off area to the civil hospital and who doesn't have the money to pay to the peon of the emergency ward to be able to enter the emergency ward. So even if you take 0.76% of GDP, that is a very large sum in billions of dollars, billions of rupees. And if you allocate that for those for whom this is the necessity for survival, for the death and the life, we would be better off. But this is not what is happening. The fact of the matter is that there is a connivance between the government officials and the suppliers of the drugs. You inflate the bill, and having been in the finance department of the Sindh government, where I was in charge of the procurement of drugs, I have documented the kind of mischief which is done with the connivance of the industry and the bureaucrats, including the finance department, the supplies department, the industry. You have fake drugs which are being sold at the price which is being charged, which is as high as the patented drugs. Even the essential drugs, which should be about 95% for the normal care of the poor populations, are just not simply available. They are sold in the drugstores operating outside the hospitals. So the question is not increase the allocation of funds for the health sector. It is how to modify the structure under which the healthcare delivery system is performing. And Sania Nishtar very rightly points out the history of the health reforms, that we do not have spent even 2 years or 3 years in experimenting with different models. She says in the 1997, we had the Family Health Project, in which we had the district health authorities, district health government, district health management teams, which were introduced. And the government came in power in 1999 and just completely demolished the whole system without giving it a chance to be even evaluated whether it was successful or not. And we go back to square one. And the new government comes in for 2-3 years. They are groping in dark. They don't know what to do. Then they come up with the Rahim Yar Khan experiment, where the services are contracted out to an NGO. And then the health department wakes up that they are completely out of the loop, and they convince the political leadership that we should have a Gujarat model whereby the district health officer takes over the basic health unit in the rural health center, and all that work which was going on in the Rahim Yar Khan project, which was successful, was completely replaced by a completely new model. And that model, after the change of this government, has disappeared. So we start from de novo, we start from square one, without having gone through what she, in very lucid terms, and I would like to quote her, that you introduce the new projects without making any evaluation of the evidence which has either supported that experiment or the pilot model which you have done, and you start from scratch one. So all the costs which have been incurred on the previous projects and the previous models and experiments have also been incurred, and the benefits are zero. And this is the waste of scarce resources which fall under the 0.76% of GDP. That you are incurring the expenditures without getting any benefits for the general population. So the lack of continuity in the health implementation of whatever model you have is one of the major impediments she has identified in the book, which I think requires serious attention by civil society, by the media, which are doing some great work in order to have the awareness that this business as usual cannot sustain, cannot lead us to the future. Let the previous models, previous experiments be evaluated in a scientific basis, on the basis of evidence, and then fine-tune them, but don't throw the baby with the bathwater. The second issue I want to bring to your notice is that health financing is an insoluble problem. Even in the United States, some of you might have been following the recent developments, where 42 million Americans in the richest country of the world without any health insurance. And President Obama brought in this legislation, which is a semi-nationalized insurance system he has brought in, although his public sector pillar was completely demolished by the opponents. But that, even under the best circumstances, will cover 32 million Americans, despite the fact that the governance structure and the delivery systems are quite, efficient there. But it costs them 14% to 16% of GDP. That means that with the public debt rising to 100% of GDP, the American taxpayer is going to be under serious difficulty for at least some times to come before the benefits of the new health bill starts growing. So somebody has to pay the bill. So healthcare financing, in simple terms, health insurance for those who can afford, who are employed in the formal sector, and those who are informal sector, or those who are poor or below the poverty line, should be supported by public money supplemented by philanthropy and the non-profit organizations is the best combination. And I think Dr. Sanjay Nishtar is right in arguing the all hands on the deck approach, that we cannot compartmentalize healthcare delivery between public, private, non-profit. They all have to gel together in order to meet the demands of the various components of the society. In the end, let me congratulate Amina Sayyed, who has been doing a great job in bringing in very many titles. But this is a title which has really pleased me, because this is based not on rhetoric, not on recycling of opinions, not on emotions, but hard, solid fact-based analysis, and I hope she will continue this tradition in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sari. I'm reminded that there aren't any questions with our volunteers, and as we are running late, we may not be able to open the floor to questions. So if you have questions, please write them down and Dr. Sanya will try and respond to them or interact with you in her closing statement. Dr. Saab, I have nothing to do with the sequencing of the speakers, but I take responsibility as co-host for many lapses, including the time overrun, chair missing, and harassing the speaker. But let me try and delight him and Mrs. Amina Sayyed by quoting Mr. Javed Jabbar about his views on communication skills. Language is an instrument for precise and analytical, scientific and creative thinking, and if young people want to do well, they should improve their communication skills by reading more extensively. I'm sure you're pleased with that. My personal interaction with Professor Juma increased immediately after the October 2005 earthquake disaster. As Executive Director of Jinnah Postgraduate Medical Center, then Professor Rashid Juma moved his team of doctors to Muzaffarabad to serve the physically challenged persons. He also helped raise funds to establish a modern rehab unit there. Professor Juma's dad was also a father of neurosurgery in Pakistan. Even today, when the O.V. Juma Memorial Lecture is held, eminent consultants from overseas come to deliver groundbreaking papers in neuroscience. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Juma, Director General Health.
Thank you, Hamid, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Mr. Hussain, Mr. Javed Jabbar, Dr. Bilay, Dr. Tipu, Mr. Amina Sayyed, and of course, our star of the evening, Sanya Nishtar. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. As you know, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is that the Minister is not going to be here, but the good news is that the speech that I'm supposed to read for him is short and brief. But I do feel bad that he's not here, and I can tell you that Hamid Jafar must have really pulled a major PR job on him, because he was absolutely dead set on coming. And for the last 3 days, he knew that the President had a small meeting in which he was the focal person. He had to be there, but he resisted right until the end. And then the Presidency said to him, "You really have to be here." And that's when he succumbed. And it's a shame, because he's an extremely articulate speaker, and he's a very personable person, and I think that you would have enjoyed meeting him. He's been a good leader for the Health Ministry, and I will spend a few minutes reading his speech, which is: "It is unusual for me to be invited to attend an Oxford University Press book launch, because I am not a retired soldier or a bureaucrat who now wants to tell all." But in part, because books relating to the work of the Health Ministry are written very rarely in Pakistan. This is what makes Joke Pipe so noteworthy, and doubly so as it comes at a time when we have reached the end point in our long effort to produce a new national health policy. The national health policy is a fundamental document for the country, laying out the national aspirations for its health. And I am privileged to have the opportunity to be involved with the formulation of our policy, which has been born of extensive process of which the author of Choke Pipes has been a part, apart from a wide group of stakeholders from civil society, government officers, politicians and others. It is not by accident that so many of the past health policies were developed in the tenure of a People's Party government. The People's Party manifesto seeks to extend social protection of the underprivileged by providing universal access to primary health care that is preventive, curative, and through a system that has the appropriate human resource and supplies. This health policy draws upon our desire to support the poor by mitigating the effects of ill health and the cost of seeking health care. It does so by bringing healthcare to the doorstep when possible and to the poorest communities in general. Particular care was taken to ensure that the policy synergizes with the aspirations of the provinces and to meet national targets. The policy that we have conceived is based on 7 objectives. The fundamental of these is to provide a basic set of assured services that are preventive and curative in their nature and available in a package to all of those who may wish to seek health services from public health outlets. The fulfillment of this worthy objective would require improvements in human resource available to the health system, particularly including women workers in remote locations. Service delivery must be supported by efficient information system and secure supplies of appropriate medicines and instruments, and we must recognize that the critical aspect of achieving these objectives would be appropriate financing for health services along with governance and accountability. However, well, the policy may be conceived, it means little unless it is to be implemented, and previous policies have not been fully translated into change. Many factors contributed to this lack of application, but 2 stand out. One was that governments were not allowed to finish tenure and subsequent administrations perhaps did not fully implement the strategies. The other has been a lack of governance. This policy and its implementation find particular emphasis in holding persons and programs accountable for their work and held to a higher standard of governance. Indeed, this higher standard of governance is a recurring theme in Choke Pipes, which reflects an extensive analysis of the health system of Pakistan and in its review of all the components finds challenges of governance and weakness of regulation. To overcome these challenges, a broad partnership is needed, and it is our fervent wish that all the stakeholders come together to ensure that it is translated into better health for the people of Pakistan. When Hamid Jafar was talking with the health minister, I was actually in the room, and so I was privy to a little exchange in which Hamid Jafar said, "Oh well, okay, if you really must read your speech, please make sure that you tell him that's all he's supposed to do and he's not to give the audience his own theories." But I'm sure the author would not grudge me if I was to say a couple of words really in response to some of the observations, and very fine observations they were by the panelists. I just want to address first the issue that Tiku raised about the vertical programs. And what I want to tell you is that as far as the health ministry is concerned, these have been the most critical aspect of its work for many years. And the vertical programs have made a difference. They've certainly made a difference to tuberculosis in this country. They've certainly made a difference to malaria in this country. They've certainly made a difference to the overall incidence of polio in this country. And I could point to others. However, what is true, and Dr. Nishtar points this out, is that the promise of integrating these services into the district and the basic health system has not been lived up to. And that continues to be a challenge which the health ministry must come to terms with. And this is where you come into the contradiction between what is a patent universal truth and the desires and the needs of the people who are to implement these programs and policies. And perhaps a lot of times it's this contradiction that gets in the way. The other thing that gets in the way, of course, is political interference, and this is a theme that, again, the author has mentioned in her book, but anybody who spends any time with the workings of Pakistan's health system at the provincial and the district level realizes that it has become hostage to political forces, as has every other aspect of public life. It's not just the health system. You have to go to any district in this country and recognize and realize that in each one of them there are 2 or 3 important political players, and all the state service provisions are hostage to a tug of war between these political forces. And these tug of wars, I suggest to you, actually are only exacerbated at the times of military rule and suspension of democratic governance. And however bad democratic governance is, these dissenting forces must be allowed to play their course, and the people be allowed to be empowered enough to direct this and bring these on to a mode where they're eventually serving the purpose of the people rather than the political forces themselves. And I suggest to you that one of the reasons, and what none of the panelists has alluded to the subtitle of Dr. Sania's book, which refers to Pakistan's mixed public health system, mixed health system. And what she bases this on is that it is a largely private but a fundamentally public service delivery paradigm. And the mixture is getting more and more skewed towards private provision because the public provision is failing. This is something that the health policy that the minister's speech talks about hopes to address. Because what the policy tries to do is to say, here is a set of services. It may not be everything. You won't get your heart bypass, you won't get your new knee joint, you won't perhaps even get a cataract lens replaced. But there are some things which are fundamental to the public health goals as epitomized in the Millennium Development Goals, which is the rights of women and children to health, for instance, immunization. These are fundamental and very basic services that the state must offer. And what the new health policy says is that these must be assured. And it promises to work with the provinces to make these basic services available. And I believe that if we can achieve this, and can I tell you that one of the big challenges that the leadership is going to have is to try and convince the planning and the finance divisions to be able to sail with this message. And if you can combine this with another initiative which is on the table, which is a health insurance or a health subsidy for those poor who are identified in the Benazir Income Support Fund. Those poor have, the targeting of them has started along the lines of a poverty scorecard, and the aim is to get to 16 districts by the end of next year. And behind the development of the scoring system and the identification of the poor will come the Benazir Income Support Program, but plus a health expenditure and livelihood protection program with the acronym, but nobody's buying it in Islamabad right now, which is HELP. And I believe that what the HELP program does is that it does protect those people who are forced to seek admission to a public or a private facility, but even if it is a public facility, they are asked to spend money on services, largely supplies, and this is a burden which really is intolerable. And I think that this combination of this subsidy for admissions and the basic set of preventive services should bring us, at least conceptually, and then I hope in time, in reality, closer to the vision of health for all vulnerable people. The biggest problem in this, and Dr. Sanya and her work does address this, is the issue of human resource. The biggest problem in Pakistan, I think, is not that medicines are stolen and that there's pilferage. We can live with that. But what we can't live with the lack of the human resource to deliver health. Because at the end of the day, health is a service that is delivered by humans who are trained in certain ways, are trained along certain parameters, and the whole force or cadre of health workers that are required, appropriately trained and appropriately motivated, is what you don't have. And what's sad is increasingly they're turning their backs on the public health system. And for me, that is the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is how do we, perhaps by a combination of things, a lot of it will involve task shifting tasks of physicians to non-physicians, but how do we get people to go to remote districts, remote union councils, and remote villages and provide these services? And those are the things that people like yourselves who've been here for 2 hours and I see deeply interested in the issue of health. People like yourselves must come together and share ideas, and more important, once again, bring to center stage the motivation that the health workers require to do this. I want to just end by saying that having spent some time in Islamabad, I realized that the biggest challenge that Pakistan faces is that there is no coherence of authority and power. Every person in Pakistan is a big shot. And it's a question of how big shot that big shot is, or how big shot the man that you believe is your patron and savior can be when you need him. At every flow of authority, there is distraction and disturbance by extraneous influence, because authority doesn't flow in the way that it should. I want to just share with you something that Tipu alluded to, and a lot of people believe, which is there is perhaps corruption and maladministration and malgovernance in the way medicines are registered. And indeed, the author in her book refers to this as well. If there's one direct responsibility that I have in Islamabad, is to register medicines. And when I got there, I realized that for a long time, my predecessor had stopped really paying attention to this, because her patron was the ex-military dictator. The military dictator had gone and she had lost interest, and she stopped having registration meetings. And there was a huge backlog. To me, this backlog was obviously a honeypot to draw people to pay to jump the queue. And I said to this section, we are going to finish all pendency. I want you to work overtime. I want you to put up all the files. I want you to draw big agenda items for our registration meetings. And we started. And in the first month we held a meeting, the second month we held 2 meetings, and pretty soon the industry was applauding and saying this is great. But then there came one particular meeting where there was a large number of items that were being imported from around the world. And the industry said, but how can you do this because we make these items? And we said, yes, but under the free trade agreements and the WTO rules that the government of Pakistan has ascribed to, you cannot ban these or you cannot restrict these unless you do them by certain well-defined quality parameters. But they were having none of this. And pretty soon, it was all over the press that the registration board had done 4,000 drugs in one meeting, not saying that in the previous meeting, we had done 4,500. And in the previous meeting before that, we'd done 3,000, and they were loving every minute of it. And what made this whole issue worse was that amongst the drug industry owners who would like to see a monopoly of general products, let's say, which is what they make, amongst the factory owners were also people sitting in the assembly. So pretty soon we were dragged before the Standing Committee of Health of the Assembly, and we were dragged before the Standing Committee in the Senate, trying to justify what we thought we were doing in the best interest of the industry. Nobody could point out to what we had done wrong or what rule we had violated. It was all innuendo. That they've done 4,000 drugs. And there's a particular program which I don't know about, but I heard that was having field day where they sit and talk about corruption in government. They said 4,000 drugs, DG, and this I think of course was patently unfair, but it's an illustration of how special interest groups conspire to bend things their own way. And now what's happening, of course, is that we're saying, hey, we can't do more than 500 or 1,000 drugs in one meeting. And they're saying, but the industry is dying. But I said, but when we were doing everything that we could for you, you were saying, there's something wrong. So there is this situation where regulatory authority and regulatory efficiency is constantly challenged. And that's the point I wanted to make to you. Because if you do read Sania's book, and I have read it, the one thing there's one phrase that keeps coming up over and over again, perhaps once every 2 or 3 pages, and that is weakness of regulatory regime. And I suggest to you that regulatory regimes are challenged because of the fact that the flow of power and authority in Pakistan is contaminated at every level by political forces that should be working in the interest of the people but are devoting all their energies in working in the interest of themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Juma, for many clarifications. I have 2 quick confessions to make. Inviting and getting the minister's acceptance was not a very difficult task. He has, like many of us here, great admiration for the offer. So he agreed to come and he said, I would like to because it's a matter of interest. And the second confession is because of our very old family friendship. I was privy to the information that you were sitting with the minister when I was talking to him. Choke pipes is well past wake-up call. Countries within the region have shown marked improvement in health indicators since they signed the Millennium Development Goals. There's no reason why we cannot. I will just conclude with a verse from Shakespeare before inviting Dr. Sania Nishtar to conclude the proceedings. Purity of heart, the peace above all earthly dignities, a still and quiet conscience. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite Dr. Sania Nishtar to share her views and reminiscence of the journey that she undertook to write Choke House, and she will respond to the questions that she has received in the meantime. Thank you.
DG last minute. Dr. Ishrat Hussain, Dr. Bilay, Mr. Javed Jabbar, Professor Tiku, and my dear friend Amina, who now runs my life. Thank you so much for that. Have been so overwhelmed by the hospitality and by the warmth and by the welcome that I received in Karachi at the book launch. It exceeds the welcome, and I'm sure Amina will weigh me out of that. It exceeds the welcome that we had in our own city, Islamabad. Thank you very much for that. I don't have prepared notes, I don't have a prepared speech. I was hoping to get enough questions to be able to weave into a coherent response, and I have received very few. My sense is that the panelists have done such an excellent job of responding to all your questions that you may have in your mind, that there really is no need to dilate further upon the book. But I would nevertheless like to make some remarks. With regard to what the book is about, a lot of people ask me as to what my motivation was. And I think the motivation stems from the context. The motivation comes from the environment that 170 million people live in. We live in very troubled times. We live in a country which has external and internal security threats. We live in a country which has extreme kinds of macroeconomic challenges. And we see that as opposed to this, the capability of the state, I don't want to say the government because I don't want to go ahead with regime bashing. This is a state phenomenon. This is a systemic phenomenon. This does not have to do with individuals or administrations. We notice that the capacity of the state to target welfare towards people has been extremely eroded. And the book actually takes this and frames the discussion within this context. And today, if you ask me just one thing about the book, I will tell you, it is not about the health sector. It mirrors us and it tells us how the state system functions. And perhaps it gives some insights about how we need to initialize our thinking and get further along in our planning towards reform of the state system. There are two things that I'm very acutely aware of as an author of this book and after having brought this process to completion. One of them relates to the fact that health is not about the health sector at all. When I go to Geneva and when I sit on the side of the international side, indeed one of the papers that I received from the audience basically critiques as to why I do not accept public appointments within my country and choose to work in the international environment, and I respect you for that question. When I sit on that side of the table and when I see our Minister and the Director General and the Secretary of Health being bashed for the bad indicators that the country has, I think to myself, it's not their fault. It's the fault of the system, and that imprint of that fault is stamped on health, it's stamped on education, it's stamped on our demographic base, it's stamped on every other indicator, you name it. And I think we need to be cognizant of that fact. Within the health sector itself interplays with several other domains. It interplays with how the Constitution regards the right to socio-economic and regards the right to health. It has to do with federal, provincial and district relationships and how they translate into effective governance. It has to do with the unfinished agenda of the devolution initiative and how it's playing havoc with the delivery of social services at the grassroots level. It has to do with how the labor market functions. It has to do with safety net arrangements and the lack thereof with respect to so many domains, inclusive of health. And I can go on and continue to tell you what the ramifications of health are and its delivery are with the broader state systems. And indeed, when the very respected Mr. Ishrat Hussain talked about and actually encouraged me for the things that I reflected in the book as a reflection of the very modest understanding that I have of the sphere that you have absolute excellence in. These are a reflection of the broad ramifications of health and how they impact health status. So when you think health, when you think education, when you think population, when you think the social sectors, or when you think about any other state system, do not think that it is a sector in isolation, because the functioning of the broader state system impacts in each and everything we do. And in fact, if you track indicators, if you look at the world as a whole, and if you track a number of indicators, growth, unemployment is indicative of economic performance. If you look at the Human Development Index and the level of education and the level of and some health indicators, and if you look at cross-country performance rankings on governance, you will see that there is a have to think about the imprint of the broader state system on health systems performance assessment. The other thing which I feel very passionate about after having done the research and after having gone through the effort of writing this book is the fact that there are certain systemic flaws within our state system and our system of governance, and we really have to recognize that. One of them is lack of policy continuity. If you ask me whether corruption has been more damaging or whether there is anything else that has been more damaging from the broader purview of how the system functions within the state, I will tell you it is not corruption. It is lack of policy consistency. Because in every sector that you see, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's economics, whether it's the broader sphere of reform, you will see over a period of 60 years, and I'm not referring to one government or a particular administration or a political party, I'm referring to a state phenomena. You see that governments come, they initialize programs, they initialize what they'd like to call reforms, the other government comes and dismantles them. There's absolutely no accountability for the monies that are lost in the process, for the planning that is disregarded, and this continues to go on again and again and again. And the determinants of this are not within the purview of quick fixes. The determinants of this are not within individual hands, or are not within the hands of individual political parties. They have to do with how the system of governance functions. They have to do with broader reform of the political system, and they will have to do with the broader reform of governance, which is so critically needed within the country. And within that vein, alongside lack of policy consistency, the other thing that has been extremely damaging for the country, and which Mr. Hussain again has alluded to, is the fact that decision-making is extremely whimsical. It is based on political expediency. There is no regard for evidence. And the third thing, which in my humble opinion is damaging in order of priority, is the pervasive and institutionalized graft. Today, graft it has become a norm. It's a way of doing things. And I think that we need to recognize, as citizens of this country, that the poor functioning that we see out on the streets, the poor functioning that we see as part of the inherent culture of our institutional systems is a combination, A, of lack of policy consistency, B, the lack of basing decisions on evidence, and C, the lack of transparency within our systems, as a result of which graft has become pervasively institutionalized. There are two ways of responding to these systemic maladies. One of these has to do with proactive change, which comes from visionary leadership. And the other one comes from reactive change, which has to do with grassroots movement. And I think the book is a very humble contribution within this space. For me, the book is not about the health sector. For me, the book is something that mirrors the broader performance of our state system and the modest effort that I've made to catalyze some thinking about how citizens can play a part in bringing about change. Since I had promised that I'm going to take some questions towards the end, I must turn now to your papers. There are 5 set of questions that I've received. One of them relates to the role of philanthropy, and let me draw your attention to the chapter of financing in the book, where I've described 6 modes of health financing. One of them is philanthropy. Pakistan being a system where the culture of giving is extremely pronounced, philanthropy can be an extremely useful means of channeling resources into the state system. But then again, everything ultimately boils down to the capacity of the state, to the will of the institutions, to the will of the stewardship institutions, and how they can harness the outreach of private actors. And I think whoever sent me this question on philanthropy and its role in health reform has to understand that of course that will is there as part of citizens, but the state has to mobilize it. The state has to effectively institutionalize it and harness it and channel it in a manner so that it is available to people in need. The second question that I have received is about generic drugs and about generic policies. Whoever has written this question has referred back to the generic policies of the previous government, which is currently in power, and they have asked me as to why that is not relevant today. But let me tell you that this is an extremely important subject, and I'm sure the Director General in a one-to-one interaction will have a lot more to tell you about it than I do. There is a role of the government in the pharmaceutical sector, and I think it's important to appreciate that. The government, as the Director General also has illuminated, has to be an honest hand. It has to be an effective and honest regulator. They have to provide a conducive environment, and then they have to make sure that the incentives that they give to the pharmaceutical industry are matched up in such a way against benefits that can be accrued to populations, and the government has a role in that space. If you read the chapter on medicines and related products, I've dwelled upon the three areas of regulation, which are quality regulation, price regulation, and intellectual property rights regulation, as a peg to discuss this further and to discuss why and how it is important to facilitate the private sector, to let them make profit and to let them live, but that the role of the government is to be that honest redistributive hand. And this applies not just to the pharmaceutical sector, this applies to the broader spectrum of state functioning at several different levels. So thank you for that question, and I'm happy to interact with you over tea. There's another question about malpractices in the health sector, and an institution has been named, which I will not refer to. And then there are other two questions about how pervasive corruption has been. And to you, I will respond that yes, that has become a way of that's become a way of doing business. But if you read the first chapter, you will get a sense of why that is the case. Because I have attempted to explain what I call the mixed health system syndrome. This is actually a fundamental anomaly which happens in systems where publicly funded service delivery coexists with privately provided service delivery for profit, and in these environments there are perverse incentives as a result of which people moonlight in the private sector. They charge for services that are meant to be provided for free. They bill for resources for reasons that have been described by my co-panelists a lot more adequately. And this is not just a one-off phenomenon. Malpractices are not a one-off phenomenon. These have become extremely well ingrained and institutionalized into the system. And in order to break those, there are some conceptual and some operational remedies available. And the bulk of what I try to what I've attempted to outline in the chapter of reform is an effort to go around that. There's a question about, the last question that I will respond to is a question about malpractices, and the writer, the person who's written that question has actually alluded to some names and some institutions which I again will not allude to. And he's talked about, he's asking me why that continues to be so pervasive, and I refer you back to the earlier discussion on institutionalized graft, because provider behaviors in the private sector towards malpractice are also reflect lack of regulatory oversight on part of government agencies. Our government agencies, as Professor Juma also acknowledged, there are lots of fundamental anomalies with the hierarchy of command. There are lots of issues with the separation of regulatory implementing and policy-making powers, and those fundamental problems are actually at the root of the problem, which is why government agencies neither have the capacity nor the adequate infrastructure to be able to regulate private providers. I'm happy to talk to you on a one-on-one session tomorrow afternoon and even during tea subsequently. I was officially supposed to say thank you, so I must do that very quickly. First of all, I must thank Mr. Hamid Jafar for co-hosting this event. Hamid is somebody who brings great value to the health sector in terms of the his capacity to mobilize resources from the private sector, and then not just to mobilize those resources and put them in a silo, but then to house them towards sustainable initiatives that are of help to the public system at large. And I've seen him do this with CHAL, which is a network that he founded. I've seen him do this with several other initiatives, and I think the enterprise, the entrepreneurial spirit of the private sector, which I see very vibrantly, which I can actually palpate in Karachi, needs to be effectively harnessed for the good of the state. And I think people like Hamid Jafar and his efforts need to be commended in that particular remit. I'd like to thank my publisher, Amina Sayyed, and I'd like to thank a very efficient team who I've had the great pleasure of interacting with over the last year whilst the book was in the process of review. I must commend them for their professionalism, for their very welcoming attitude towards writers. I have seen extremely tough editors. I work with many, so I must thank you for taking me in your fold, and I must thank you for your partnership. I must thank all my colleagues. Not many of them can be here. They're based in Islamabad. They do a wonderful job of giving me input, help and support with all the research work that we do collaboratively. And I must thank my family in the end. I'm somebody with a very crazy schedule of doing many things at the same time. And my dear husband, Ghalib Nishtar, sits at the far end of the room. I'm extremely grateful to you for your love and affection and for the space that you've given me and the encouragement. And if there is one singular lady who deserves my commendation and my respect and my love, that's my mother-in-law. She's here in the audience, and she's extremely supportive towards what I do, and it's because of that I'm able to do that. My daughter is in the room, and this is the second time I'm publicly apologizing to her for the long absences, she and her brother who's not back from vacations. And then of course I must remember my mother who is not here with us on account of her illness. So thank you all for having us in Karachi. Thank you for the love and the affection. And I've been extremely overwhelmed. I hope that we will be able to bring the next book here soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I think this book by Dr. Nishtar makes a very important contribution and a great analysis on some of the issues which affect the healthcare sector in Pakistan. We have a number of issues relating to constraints on service delivery, and these constraints are specific to the health sector but also general about the way that governance is being impacted in Pakistan due to a number of other interrelated issues. And I think this book is important for two reasons. It gives you a good insight onto the health sector issues. It also gives you a good insight on some of the systemic problems relating to service delivery in all social sectors in Pakistan. So it's a worthwhile read. It's a thought-provoking read, and it's very well researched and well documented. So I really enjoyed reading it, and I think others should do that as well.
Thank you so much. I think it's a wonderful effort in terms of elaborating on the issues in the healthcare sector. And I want to say that it's not only a wonderful effort, it's a courageous effort, because it factually highlights what's going wrong, and it also provides some of the solutions. Dr. Sania Nishtar has always made an attempt. What she preaches, she practices. So in this book, it's more of evidence-based, full of facts, full of data, full of references. And one of the convictions I have is that once you raise the issue, solution will follow. It may take some time, but I'm sure, and that will be the contribution of Dr. Sania Nishtar, that today she has raised the issue, tomorrow somebody will find the solution. The second thing I would like to also say is that the other thing is important is we all talk about healthcare issues, but we are not ourselves prepared to pay for it. Nobody else will pay for your health. Yourself will have to pay, and that needs to be addressed as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. ना आवाज़ ठीक है, वो हो जाएगी इंक्रीज. वो हेडफोन में नहीं आ रही थी जब इन्होंने इस पे प्ले किया.
इतनी थी कि वो आराम से हम उसको कर लेंगे, वो इतना इशू नहीं, वो श्योर कर लेंगे कंट्रोल। वो जो हमारा एडिटर है ना, ही इज़ वेरी गुड इन दिस थिंग, तो वो करना है।